Welcome to another and special episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? I'm your host, Karen E. Osborne, and I'm so glad that you are back. I'm so glad that you are with us today. And if you've been sticking with us these 18 months, you know that mostly I interview authors. I always interview readers. You can't get on unless you're a reader. But I also interview a lot of authors. But did you see the musician I interviewed? Did you see some of the visual artists? Well, I have like a really big treat for you today. Big treat. So I want to introduce you to Jeff Wahlstrom. Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Karen.
So let me tell you a little bit about him. So I know him. You know how I love it when my philanthropy life and my artistic life come together? Well, how long have I known you, Jeff?
I would say, boy, that's a good question. It goes all the way back to, I think, 1993, maybe?
Yeah,
like
that sounds
That's
right.
a long time. That's a
long time. But we knew each other as people in the fundraising and consulting world. And now here we are, creators.
Yes.
So Jeff is a nonprofit and philanthropy expert, a discerning reader, but most importantly, an artist. He has he primarily now splits his artistic time between, and he's going to explain all this to us. Artistic time between watercolor collages, and he's going to show us examples too, block printing, and creating an occasional sculpture for friends. He's had several shows and he's going to share his art with us. So isn't that cool?
It's exciting, and I'm pleased to be part of this.
So let's first start talking about books, because most of our audience, that's what they are. Whether they're artists, creators, writers, everybody's a reader. So let's start. What is on your to-read pile?
Yeah, my to-read pile is relatively small right now. I really devour books. Over the last few years, I've been reading 50 to 60 books a year. So I'm just sort of, as fast as I see a New York Times review for a book that looks or sounds interesting, I'll go for it. I do. One of the things I've been telling people since I retired is that I am going to be one of the only people in the world who is going to read James Joyce's Ulysses all the way through, because I don't believe many people have actually done it. I think a lot of people pretend as if they have, and I know I started it once as an English major.
English major. I didn't finish it either.
No, so that is on my to-do list. But right now I'm reading the Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. She was the one who wrote Hamnet, which I thought was a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And then a friend has gotten me into the Cork O'Connor series by William Kent Kruger, and he's written some lovely books that aren't in that series as well. So I really like his writing, and so it's just the second book in the series is Boundary Water. He's a retired policeman, or he's a policeman who ends up solving crimes up in the North Country, and actually very, very well written. So those are on my to-do list or my to-read lists.
Yeah. And is there a book that you've read in the last year or so that you just loved, and one or two that you'd share with our audience?
Yeah, well, I read this wonderful book just a few weeks ago called Reckonings by this wonderful author. And loved it. Fast-paced, great characters. Could see what you could see everything, and so I really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed all of your books. I just finished a book called Horse by Geraldine Brooks, and I would highly recommend that to anyone. About this horse, the Lexington, back in the 1850s. Civil War, slavery issue as a theme, very, very important, and sort of flashes back and forth to present day. Another book kind of in the same vein is Booth. And I suspect a lot of people have stayed away from it because of the John Wilkes Booth sort of thoughts about him. But it's an incredible book about that family, which is an amazing family. I mean, John Wilkes Booth was the least famous became the most famous, but he was certainly the least famous of that family of famous actors during that time. And I read a review that said it was a bit of a slog. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I didn't think of it as a slog. I just had something pop up on my screen I've got to get rid of here.
Yeah, I can't see it.
Yeah, and
is it a memoir or is it? I mean, is it historical?
It's historical fiction, but clearly very, very well researched. The notes at the end are great in terms of her writing it. She began writing it when Trump was elected and was, and then stopped. I guess was writing it, and then Trump was elected, and she stopped because she was so just whatever, yeah, and picked it back up. And anyway, there's quite a number of themes that resonate with our current times. Another book that I've read recently, The Mid-Coast. It's a book about Maine by a Maine author. Really liked it. First book by Adam White. Interesting lobster family that goes from poverty to great wealth, and there's something suspicious about it. So it's a good book from that standpoint. And lastly, I'll say Lisa and I listened to The Dutch House by Ann Patchett, and it's read by Tom Hanks.
Oh.
So yeah, so the Dutch House as read by Tom Hanks, I couldn't recommend it any more highly. It's just great, and having his voice do it, and it's a wonderful book anyway. So that's a lot more than you asked.
Oh my goodness, no! That you got me wanting that one especially. That sounds wonderful. Yeah. And just for all of you to know, Jeff is in Maine. He's a Maine guy, and also Lisa is his wife.
Right.
Not the cat back there, but it is his wife of many, many years.
41 years.
41 years, and mother of his 2 sons.
Exactly.
All right. So tell us a bit, I was looking at your website, and because it was just so interesting to look at you through this different lens, this artist lens. And I've seen one of your shows because you had a virtual show, so I got to see one of your shows. So tell our viewers first a little bit about your journey, and maybe start with watercolor collages and take us from there.
Yeah, let me step back a little bit in time too. Grew up in a family of artists. My aunt, my uncle were professional artists, teachers, and my grandfather was a painter. Another aunt was a painter, and so on. And so started taking art classes when I was just a very little kid, and took art all through, obviously, high school, college, trained in college sort of in a kind of, what would be the traditional courses, but didn't think that was a very good career choice. And so became an English major, which of course is a wonderful career
so much choice. Better.
But anyway, it all worked out well. But over time, I was really just always dabbling a bit in my art, and I really was dabbling wherever I could find some time. And shortly after our sons were born, and I would do things with them, create things with them. I was very frustrated with my watercolors and began basically ripping up some paper and turning it into, rebuilding it into the scene I was looking at, sitting on the water, looking at a scene. And I really liked sort of how it allowed me to gain control of a difficult medium. Watercolor, I find to be a difficult medium. And we live in a house filled with beautiful watercolors of our relatives. So I'm always comparing myself to them. But anyway, really then began to work with it to kind of find my own way. Always interested primarily in landscapes, Maine coast, and either cutting or tearing paper. And basically what I do is I have boxes and boxes of paper that I've painted with watercolor. And as I kind of fall in love with an image, usually from a photo that I've taken, I'll begin to recreate it. And I'll show one example of something. This one's not been framed yet, and I've just been working on it very recently. And maybe, I don't know how well that shows up, Karen, but
Oh, it shows up nicely. Oh, it's beautiful.
And so
look at all the depth.
Yeah, and so I tend to be working, so I'm building out from the back to the front. In this case, all with torn paper, except for the Mount of Scutney. This was from a photo that was sent to me by a good friend, and I decided I wanted Mount of Scutney to be really distinct, and which it is obviously, but sharp as well. But everything else is torn, the clouds and so on. So that's pretty typical of what I do. And
is that unique? Is that unique, or is that a genre?
I have seen other people who have done collage, and collage is obviously an assembling of different pieces. But I've seen people do landscapes using collage, but they tend to be flat. And what you can't really see here is that because of how I've built it out, there are shadows that the paper creates because there's space behind them. And I often will add, that mountain has three mountains sort of stacked behind it so that it stands out from the background. And so they end up having quite a bit of depth to them,
yes,
which I think is quite unique.
Yeah, that's the thing that struck me about your block. What do you call it? Block printing?
Block printing, yes.
That also, the depth, that's just such an extraordinary thing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and so a neighbor who is a book artist, which is sort of a unique art form, has a couple of printing presses, and he's taught printing at university level. And he said, I've looked at all your little collages, and because I was working at a very small size at that point. And he said, I think you would do well with trying some printing. And so he got me started really, and initially sort of working with traditional, I think what people think of as block print. So there's a black and white. Yeah, and so that's done on wood block. It's all carved so that everything that's white is carved out. Everything that's black is not. You roll the ink over it. You press the paper on it, and each one. And people think of prints as being copies. They aren't, at least in this world. And so this one is actually of Lisa's father on the back of a potato truck from years ago. But anyway, so black and white is one form, and you can obviously do color and multi-block and so on, but haven't done much of that. So then that evolved. Let's see. So during COVID, I really couldn't get into his studio to print. And so then I needed to figure out what can I do on my own. And I had this book on white line printing, or they call it Provincetown prints, because it was really a group of primarily women in around the 1920s in Provincetown who took sort of the idea of traditional Japanese block printing, multi-block wood cuts, and said there must be an easier way to do this and to make it more immediate. And of course they were looking at Cezanne and Picasso and so on, and thinking about their work. And so they came up with this idea which is really you cut the block, and I'll show you the block.
Yeah.
The blocks are really vivid.
Oh, look how
So
beautiful.
yeah, and so each of the colors is defined by a line that's cut into the wood, so white line, and each color is applied. A piece of paper is hinged so that I fold it over. So the gray sky would be first, perhaps. Piece of paper folds over it. I rub I put watercolor on that. I
Mm-hmm.
I put the piece of paper over, I rub it with a spoon, believe it or not, and pull the paper back. And if it looks good, I move on to another color and so on. But it does allow you to work at home, and it's pretty immediate. And so so there's the print, and you can see obviously the block gets super saturated with ink, but you can see the white lines there and what's left. So anyway, so that's and I've done a lot of that over the last few years. Most recently, so one more.
Okay, cool.
Most recently, I went to a workshop in Woodstock, New York on Japanese block printing, multi-block printing. They call it Mokahanga, and learned the technique. And this is subtle, so that it's a little
Well, I can see it.
It'll look a little light on there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different kind of printing, and I hope to spend more time doing that. And again, I can do it here in my studio without a printing press. It's it uses a lot of the same qualities, and so it's something else I'm exploring right now. I have a show going on right now in Bangor, where I have 35 pieces, 20 collages, and 15 prints. So you're seeing what's left behind me, and or things I haven't quite gotten around to framing and so on. But
that's wonderful.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thanks.
The other thing I liked what you said, and it's something that I find is true for most creatives, is you said you took a class. We're always working on our craft, always working, trying to improve our craft. I don't know any author or artist or musician that isn't trying to improve something, learn something new. So it's really cool that you're just continuing to evolve. Thank you. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it was one of those things that actually it's surprising that it took some, first of all, I think it takes courage to be a writer and to put yourself out there. You're giving your being, your soul, your everything is out there, your creativity, and you're judged by it. And people tell you if they like it or they don't, and they write comments about it.
Reviews and things. Yes.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't usually get that, but anyway, it's same with visual arts. It takes a lot. I just felt like it took a huge step to start showing my art. And I think even starting to take that first workshop that I took, it's like, wow, I'm going to be with other people, other artists. Will I measure up? How will I do? And so on. And of course, it was just lovely. And I can't wait to take another class now that I've kind of broken the ice on that. And I'm sure there'll be some clunkers too along the way, but I think, learning new techniques. And I've been fortunate in having a neighbor who really has been a mentor and an instructor, at least on the printing side of things.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Something that we talked about off camera, just to kind of wrap us up here. But one of the things that you mentioned was that it was only recently that people say, well, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm an artist. And I remember that moment. I remember the first time somebody asked me, what do you do? And I didn't say, well, I used to do this. And then I was this, and I had all this years of experience. And I just say, I'm a novelist.
Well, and you've had well more than, we'll say we both have had more than 40 years of a career where we could very quickly say, well, in my case most recently, I was a consultant, and I was
Yeah.
able to describe that quickly, and it was my identity. And so this is a change for me, as somebody who is retired. Now I'm fortunate in that I'm able to spend as much time as I want to doing this work. And sometimes that means I play a lot more golf, or we do a lot more travel than we do art, or I can sit and
Yeah.
read. But I've really enjoyed it. And you're right, it's a big step to say, because we each knew each other. Not, I mean, when I found out Karen Osborne as a writer, it was a surprise, and I
It's
suspect
like,
the same for Jeff Wahlstrom, artist. And it doesn't mean that we weren't doing it always, and that it wasn't part of our passion and one of the things we really love to do, but it was hidden from even our closest
from
friends.
us closest friends. That's right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Jeff. This has been so fun. What a treat for me. And if our audience wanted to be able to see some of your work, purchase some of your work, and they don't live in Maine, if you live in Maine, you can find him. But if you don't live in Maine, how can all of these folks find you?
Yeah. So my website is very simple. It's jeffwahlstrom.com, and Wahlstrom is Wahlstrom, but jeffwahlstrom.com. On oh gosh, now so there I go with on Instagram. On Instagram, you would find me as CJW Maine, CJW Maine, and you'll see the work that inspires me, the photos I take that inspire me, as well as some of my artwork as well.
Oh my goodness, I have to follow you on Instagram. I would love to see that, because I remember that you loved photography. That was really your first artistic love, right?
Well,
No?
I can't resist, and now those photos are what guides me in terms of the art that I create.
That's fabulous. Well, we thank you. We thank Jeff, and Jeff and I thank you for watching. And we hope that you will join me next week. We're here on every Tuesday on What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Thanks, everybody.